We are about to start talking about SRE, DevOps, and culture, the C word. Oh, it's the first time that we've heard it today in the DevSecOps. DevSecOps, Karen, did I get that right this time? In the DevSecOps track. What's coming up next? Just a quick heads up. At 4:40, we're going to be moving. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, at 4:40, we're going to be moving over to our next slots. So that's in exactly 50 minutes from now. We are now waking up, or we are awake in the United States. So welcome to all of our guests in the Eastern Time Zone, probably the Midwest. California's probably still in bed. This will be my last session of the day. So let me take a moment just to say thank you to the conference organizers, to the people behind the scenes. That's the guys on the AV, Carla and Teresa over at Container Solutions. Without any further ado, let me please now welcome Apoorva, Hannah, Pini, and Chris to our panel. Hello, panelists.
Hello.
Hey, Jamie.
Hello.
I hope you're ready for a lively debate. I'm going to steer this debate into a direction that makes sense, but we need to kick off with a question. Carrie, what is the first question?
Oh, I've got some questions ready. So we hear about DevOps a lot, and it's kind of like there was a phase where everyone was just reading DevOps. Now we're hearing SRE. And so a big question is, what is the difference? Why do we need SRE?
I think, Chris, we're going to pass that one over to you.
Oh, lovely. Me to start. Okay. Yeah, I mean, DevOps has been one of those things that's always been a bit of a fallacy in a lot of the organizations, certainly in the last few years, in that there's never really been true DevOps. We still ended up with a lot of devs and a lot of operations where they throw things over the fence. There are a few organizations that are doing this right, but for the most part, people just band around a term like DevOps, and it doesn't actually reflect what they're actually doing. I think from the SRE point of view, it's less away from more away from the development side of things, and more around the infrastructure and ensuring that the sort of the platform and everything is actually running in an optimal way. So making sure that application things stay up rather than having the responsibility for actually developing, those applications themselves.
Does anybody agree or disagree?
I think one of my favorite kind of like differentiations between DevOps and SRE is that SRE is an opinionated implementation of DevOps within a certain culture. Within your organization, it's quite a prescriptive tool set and a way of thinking about reliability and a way of thinking and designing platforms and engineering platforms for high resiliency, high scale, reliability. And, DevOps was really all about improving that flow, breaking down those silos and allowing, teams to deliver independently, shipping software into production with some improved velocity. And I think they are not mutually exclusive. They're not two different things. I think DevOps kind of predates SRE in some senses, definitely in terms of our vocabulary about how we talk about it. But I see SRE as just one possible implementation of a DevOps culture.
This is the first time I've heard that. SRE is an implementation of DevOps. Very cool. Apoorva, what do you think about that?
So I am actually going to have another perspective here, that we need to stop just considering or looking at DevOps. I am here to represent the sec part within DevSecOps. And so it's no longer DevOps or SRE, it's DevSecOps, security collaborating with SRE and developers.
Right, okay. And where do you think SRE fits into there? Do you think SRE is separate, or you think it's an integrated part of DevSecOps?
It's definitely an integrated part of DevSecOps. And when I found out that I was going to be a part of this conference, I was very excited because traditionally product security has really not interacted with operations. And so now, where we are automating everything, where we are implementing everything in an automated manner, security has to be there in that equation with SRE and developers. So it's awesome now that there is so much of codependence between security and SRE, with both of them working on slightly different goals, where one is looking at, reliability, availability, and the other one is looking at security. But the means to achieve both of those are very similar.
And Pini, do you agree? Do you think it's all about tearing down walls and putting everybody together?
In a way it is. I do agree with more or less everything that was said so far. I think what's important is that it's not enough to change the name from sysadmin to DevOps to SRE. The question how the work changes. What are the processes? What are the team structures? What the people are doing? Are they breaking silos? Are they actually doing the continuous improvement and proactive maintenance and preventive maintenance? And if yes, call it whatever you like. It really is about what are you doing and not how you call the people.
If we went back 20 years, would good teams tell us, oh, we were already doing that already?
Yeah, I just had this conversation in one of the meetings in the conference. You can schedule this one-on-one chats. And very nice guy from Italy was telling me exactly that. I'm doing it for 20 years. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Hannah, what do you think about that? Is this a naming convention? Have teams always been doing this, or is there something new being brought to the table with SRE right now?
I think it's we keep finding new buzzwords for the same essential problems that we're trying to solve. I do think that with the increase in people moving to the public cloud, with the increased use of containers, I think we're seeing a real paradigm shift in how you achieve the same thing. And also there's this incredible ecosystem of tools and technologies that we have at our disposal, which we didn't used to have. But I think in essence, the problems that we're solving are much the same, and the way in which we're successful is much the same. It's by working together and by taking an engineering mindset to some of these process problems.
I remember when I first learned about DevOps, and one of the principles was you would use the same tools in Dev as you would in Ops, which is why Docker had this uptake. Is that same in SRE? Do we have the same tools right across the teams?
Yeah, I absolutely think you should, and I think some of the fundamental practices within SRE that I think are incredibly powerful, such as having SLIs and SLOs. I think you can have those in pre-production as much as you can in production. If your pre-production environments are down, if your development environments are down, there is a cost to your business associated with those. And so I think it's actually really important to have that continuity of tool set and practice in pre-production as well, because the SLO may not be the same. It absolutely shouldn't be the same, probably, but there is a cost associated with the reliability of those engineering environments.
10 years ago, I helped a company with really, really highly automated processes, but the last mile was to take a zip drive with a jar file on it to a fellow who liked to unpack it as part of his work routine. And they were still doing that because it was a process that worked for them. Carrie, what is our next topic?
Oh, could I just add?
Absolutely. Yeah, come in.
So before I started working at Duo Cisco, I did consulting for a long time. And so, one of the things is like what you mentioned right now, where there was actually the product teams, the development teams, they would work, they would zip it up, and then they would throw it off the wall to the operations team, who would then unzip it and then deploy it. And so this is exactly what I've actually seen in a production environment at an organization. So you're absolutely right here. I think within the last 20 years, there's also been a major cultural change, a cultural shift. So even before I went into security, I worked as an engineer, as a developer. When I did development, I unfortunately never thought about how was it going to be deployed in production. I also never thought about the security of the application. I just focused on the development. But now all of that is changing, right? As we see all of our engineers are also thinking about how is it going to be deployed? Can I develop it in such a way that deployment is easier? So now it's a cultural change across all of these teams where there's that ownership, there's that thought process. It's not just thinking about my own siloed workflow, which is security or which is development. And I think that's an incredible change to have happened in the industry over the last so many years.
A lot changed in 20 years that we've been busy doing this, that's for sure.
I think it's exactly the point. DevOps has created the movement and cultural change, and SRE is putting processes in place.
That's a nice way of putting it. So since we're talking about security, that's actually where the next question leads. So, and maybe Apoorva, you can help us get it started, is how can SRE specifically help with security?
So that's a great question. And I think there are two components here. One is, as SRE now starts looking at infrastructure in a software development manner, the scope for product security also increases, because now it means that we can also help secure the infrastructure even before it is deployed. So now we have, IACs, infrastructure as code pipelines, and automated testing and tooling. We also can add automated security testing. So now we can help SRE, and SRE can help us by getting us involved sooner, because we don't have to be involved right at the end, just at deployment into production. But we can actually help build all of that security in as they are working on their scripts, as they are working on codifying all of the infrastructure. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is security can now leverage some of the controls that SRE has in place, because SRE knows the infrastructure the best. And so as security, how can we leverage some of their monitoring controls, some of their logging, their auditing, to make sure that the security of the environment is also safe and sound? So I think it's two ways where security can help, where SRE can help security, is get us involved first, sooner, and then help us leverage some of your common resources.
That's great. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have some ideas on SRE, the link between SRE and security?
Yeah, I would just sort of enthusiastically agree with everything you just said. I think we work in very highly dynamic environments now, where it used to be more static. You used to maybe push a release out like every few months. I remember when I started working as a release manager, that was literally my job. And you had a checkbox, which was, is it secure? Tick. And that's not practical. That's not a good implementation of security process in today's environments, where we're pushing changes much more frequently. So it's about, how do we shift it left? How do we bake security in? How do we put guardrails in place to make it really easy for engineers to do the right thing?
I guess all of this demands a lot higher skills from people, doesn't it, Chris? If we have to know about infra, security, pipes, and actually development.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say, it's the security, sort of having been in development and various other things for the last 25 years, sort of security was always an afterthought. It was always one of the things that devs did last. And actually retrofitting security into applications is a nightmare. You sort of end up doing 120% more work than you had to, because it's so much more difficult. So the movement of bringing this stuff in earlier, it sort of takes you along from the waterfall model, where you had your design up front, you did your building, and then you threw it over the fence to test. Whereas now you've got your agile methodology, it's a constant feedback loop. You've got testing going on consistently all the time. And security now is sort of fitting into that loop as well. So rather than designing it and retrofitting security into it, you're doing it all up front and actually sort of manufacturing the stuff in the right way up front. I mean, certainly when you start coming into things like containers, and I've sort of seen the evolution over 6 years. It's like 6 years ago, people would develop containers, they'd run everything as root, And then what would happen is as soon as they hit production, they're no longer allowed to run as root. You'd have pod security policies that broke your applications. Whereas what you now have is sort of consistency throughout that pipeline. So from your dev and test, you run in exactly the same way that you do in production. And it eases that sort of security problem that you had before, where you get to the end and security will break everything. Whereas now it's sort of baked in from the start.
Are we asking a lot of people? I remember when we had a 20-minute build when I was in my 20s, and it was quick because we were an XP team, but we all used to drink tea, or quite as coffee actually, and eat snacks and then go back. And we were a high-performing team. Now, if I listen to you, Chris, it sounds like all of our teams must be high-performing. It seems like we're always busy. We're changing. We're constantly deploying, constantly working. Is it stressful? Is it more stressful to be a modern developer or a modern SRE right now?
I don't think it's more stressful. I think it's different. I actually think it's more exciting because you don't have that 20 minutes where you sat around and can't do anything because your computer's churning through stuff. The sort of the speed of computers and the ability to multitask at the same time, you can set things off and go. And that was, I think, is one of the interesting things, and where sort of the evolution of developments come, is that you're no longer bottlenecked by certain processes. There's lots of multitasking that you can do, and I actually find it more interesting. I think there's at one point I was just doing infrastructure, and infrastructure got boring. There was no way to innovate, so I moved across to development, and development was where you could still innovate. And now actually with Docker and things like that, there's actually it's become sexy again doing infrastructure. It's a lot more interesting. There's a lot more scope for innovation. There's such a rich tool set out there to play with, that actually it's become really interesting again. And sort of the skills, you no longer have that sort of infrastructure person and that developer person and that test person. Everyone has to know a little bit about everything. So I think it's actually become a lot more interesting. And actually, I don't think the stress, I mean, it depends on the organization and what you're developing, I guess, but I don't think the stress levels have particularly gone through the roof. But I think the scope for innovation and the richness of the sort of the ecosystem that you can play in is far greater than it used to be. So I think it's a much more interesting, exciting place to work in sort of development and infrastructure now than it was, say, 20 years ago.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was just remembering when you said that. Do you remember when there was that whole no ops movement? Yeah. Like no ops, like devs do everything. And I think, we're in danger of going the same route with security, and it's just not practical. Like, you can't expect a developer to know absolutely everything about everything. And so we have to organize ourselves around, specialisms, and also, value-driven kind of value-driven teams who are delivering these apps. And I think one of the key cultural shifts that we need to make within a lot of organizations is breaking down those silos with security and having them focus on really practical enablement for the teams who are implementing stuff, and having real kind of hands-on input into the processes that ensure continuous security. I think that's probably the change I would like to see. I don't want us to see us go down that no ops route again, where we don't recognize the different skill sets that are needed to deliver.
Yeah, pragmatism is sort of the word that I always bring into pretty much every conversation, because what you'll find is you'll have a security specialist who wants to go to the nth degree, but actually the cost of doing that and that extra sort of 0.5%, 0.1%, is it actually going to mitigate against anything that you wouldn't have been covering off before? So making sure that people actually remain based in the real world rather than an ivory tower design, and ensuring that actually everything isn't perfect. I love the agile methodology, and it's good enough. I don't design anything now that is absolutely 100% perfect, because to get it to that point, I would never ever finish a project. And it's the same with security. You need to go to the extent that you need to go to ensure that you're protecting what you're trying to protect. You don't need to protect against absolutely everything if it's not going to cause you pain.
So let me bring Pini in now, because I've got another question or follow up from this. It sounds like we all have to play nice. Security people have to play nicely with application developers and with operation engineers. Where do all the arseholes now work? Where do they go? Where do the people go who don't play nice? Are we in an age of collaboration?
It doesn't mean any of that. I mean, still, unfortunately, they're in all the organizations that allow them to be the way they are, right? And that's not going to change, because the stress and the bad ways of working are created by organizations, allowed by organizations and managers. And in any environment, it doesn't matter if you use containers or if you do DevSecOps or you do sysadmin and development, there will be either stress or freedom to innovate, depending on the way the organization is managed. And if you allow people to behave to each other in certain ways, and you're essentially by not in a way punishing people for behaving as assholes to each other, you're allowing everyone to be like that. Right? This is, for example, a reason we have very strong code of conduct in this conference, is so we respect each other. But it's not the same for every conference, or it's not the same for every company.
Are we in an age of collaboration? Is that now a skill? Have you got competitive advantages as an engineer?
We are, and yes, it is. But then again, it always was useful to find a way to collaborate with people, right? Genuinely a good idea. But on the other hand, this idea of DevOps when everyone is in the same room and hacking together and doing everything, it's just it's not a reality. It's fantasy, right? The specialization is essential, and economy of scale pushing us to do things that are reasonably narrow. We cannot expect people to understand details of Kubernetes and build amazing code in, I don't know, whatever, Java, Go, whatever. There has to be specialization. So there will be APIs between different teams. Those APIs can be fully automated, so people don't see each other at all. So you don't really have to collaborate. But it's still a very useful skill that takes you a very long way.
I think that when looking at sort of back 20 years, sort of development teams were very isolated in the way that they were doing things, and that they would be given a design and they would go off and sort of manufacture something that will pop out the other end. I think what's happening now is those development teams are being broken down. And I think that the thing that I'm seeing is the collaboration. So whilst you don't necessarily have to have the skill set to do everything within a DevOps team, what you do know is now the person to go and speak to. You have that relationship with the people to actually progress what you need to do. It's no longer you need to speak to this department and you speak to a random faceless person in another department. Whereas now what you've got is a smaller team that works more as a unit, but each still has its specialism.
Now I'm going to bring Carrie in now because we have a further questions coming in from Brella. So for the people listening, Carrie, what have we got?
We have a great question. And one I'm also super curious about. What have been your best experiences in breaking down silos? What processes or baked-in interactions with developers, security, SRE that have been positive? And there was a follow-up to that, just especially with Corona, we're finding now teams are actually becoming more siloed, the more separate we are.
I have perfect answer for this. Periodically we are doing assessments to our customers, right? So basically assess the situation and tell them what to improve. And we have one of those companies, we are doing it right now. I'm not going to mention the name.
Don't say the name.
I don't say the name. I didn't ask the permission. They're just doing it right. Yeah. So everything is right. It's actually very difficult to give them good advice because they're so good. The main point they're doing is essentially everyone's saying, hire good engineers and let them be. And they're actually doing it. Right? They're actually doing it. There's a lot of ownership, responsibility. People are taking care of their stuff, right? They're taking care end to end. And if things are broken, they find the people to fix it. And this kind of responsibility and ownership and trust, the organization trusts every team essentially. And this takes them so far, and they consider to change this, which probably will only make things worse. So because the side effect is that there's too much freedom and too much variability in tooling and other things. But it's actually a very positive thing. And it creates a lot of freedom and innovation.
What is your big takeaway? They stuck to the rules. They stuck to the guns. We say this and we're going to do this.
And it's very difficult because you essentially, in most organizations today, there is strong hierarchy. And the big bosses, they want to tell people what to do and control everything. And effectively said, this is illusion of control. It's not real. So we will actually trust the people. But that requires also teams to actually do a good job. Otherwise, the trust will be eroded very quickly.
Let me bring Apoorva into the conversation now. What positive experiences have you seen of pulling down silos or changing interactions?
Oh, was that me?
Yes, that was for you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
That was for you.
Something different. So I have a very practical example that that has been tried and tested. So one of a common tip is use common tooling and processes as much as possible. So in a lot of organizations, I've seen that, especially when it comes to security defects, security issues, they're always, locked up in a system that nobody has access to. Not even the developers or the product managers have access to issues that belong to their products, because it's all a compliance risk and things like that. And so the only way that engineers actually can see these defects is via an emailed PDF that they will probably not open unless and until there's a fire under them. So one of the things that we do at Duo Cisco is we use common tooling for our defect management. And what that has led to is engineers, product managers have full access to their own defects that are now being built into their own processes. So now it's no longer this additional thing that they need to look at, but they can look at security defects similar to functional defects, where it's all within their processes. And so this is definitely a tip. As much as possible, adopt common tooling and processes.
That's great. There is another thought on this it's an interesting one, is people have been trying to break silos for a century already. Is it really needed? What if silos are there for a purpose? Conway's law confirms it. Does anyone have some thoughts about whether we should be breaking silos?
I disagree that there should be any silos. I think problems occur when you do have silos. Now, I'm not saying that you necessarily have to have people influencing what that team is doing, but developing in a silo is a bad thing. Developing something and not having interference from others isn't necessarily a bad thing, provided you're communicating out what you're doing. But actually developing in a complete silo and just throwing something over the fence, I've seen so many places where this just causes problems. Communication is the key to everything. So for me, COVID's actually been quite interesting because I travel a lot. Or I did prior to COVID. So what I found is actually I'm closer with my team now because I can actually get hold of them. They're not constantly traveling. I'm not constantly traveling. So actually working with that team has actually become more effective than it was before. And I think having things like virtual stand-ups and physical stand-ups when you're back in the office and getting everyone together, even if they're just talking about the bit that they're doing, it raises the awareness across the whole of the organization and the team. Even if it's not relevant to them, it's good to have that background knowledge. And like I say, this comes down to the things where you can then, the person to go and speak to. If you've got a vague awareness that this person's working on something that you you need to interact with, then you know who to go to rather than just sort of sending out a blanket email or something. Gone are the days really when you sort of walk into an office and there's 50 developers, they're all sat there with their headphones on, not really even communicating with each other. So it's like now everyone has to work together, and it's because the turnaround and the expectation of actually getting code and good quality code out the door is so much higher. People were doing stuff and it was only in data centers and there was a very low risk. Whereas now you move to the public cloud, things are a lot more exposed. So people have to talk. So silos for me, I've never seen a silo work well in where it is a complete silo. So yeah, I disagree that silos are really needed.
What about this as a counterpoint? So we do have silos at Container Solutions. For example, our accountancy team or our accountants or our solicitors, they're a separate company and they're deeply specialized in what they do. And we communicate them via emails and messages. There's no need for them to over communicate. What will happen, team, as what we do becomes more commoditized and more standard? Will it make sense to have specialists? We've already established that. And then what happens if they start to convalesce in a team? So do we see the breaking down of silos and the rebuilding of teams as a natural evolution of structure that goes along with however standard something is? Or will that never work in what we do?
There is There's a different way to look at it. It's not silos. Silos is a bad way to implement. Like if the silos are vertical, they're terrible, right? Then throwing things over the wall. But there's a different way to look at it, which is product teams, right? And products are by definition, they're siloed, right? Because they're building something separate. You can have different products within the same company. They don't have to standardize. They don't have to coordinate too much. As long as the API, the consumption APIs are well defined, many companies work this way, right? So the product teams that are end-to-end owning that product, they don't need to collaborate with other product teams. Actually, once they start collaborating, they create tight coupling on different levels, right? So if they reuse a tooling from another product, now they need to coordinate the delivery or coordinate upgrade of that tooling or whatever else. So it's not exactly silos, but it's more creating supply chains versus layered architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's there's a sort of platform mindset that that I like to talk to my customers at VMware Tanzu about, which is, you know, and I always say, like, if you want to go fast, go alone. Like, if you can own everything and you can do it within a small team, that's absolutely fine. But if you want to go far, go together. And I think, you know, one of the things that can transform how organizations do that is actually to allow whatever it is they're building to be consumed as a service. You know, whether that be an infrastructure platform as a service, or whether that be a monitoring platform as a service, or whether that be, you know, an identity solution, or a customer profile solution, or a product catalog like API that you deliver to your organization as a service that can be interacted with and built upon as an API. I think that's one of the kind of, I guess, more modern implementations of a silo that can actually help improve flow rather than prevent it.
I think one of the biggest insights I had to this was our recent webinars with Matthew Skelton, where he goes on about treating platforms as a product. And what does a good product ever do? It has great documentation, friendly representatives, it has outreach programs. So all of a sudden, and it's voluntary. So you don't have to use the platform, but the platform has to be so good that you want to use it. I don't think we can say that's a silo done well. I think that's something different. I don't exactly know what it is, but it's a specialism that serves a wider audience.
The problem is, if there is no market forces, then the product is crap, right? That's the problem, right? And if you have no choice, if you have to use that platform, it's still internal things. There's still no documentation. And then you have to resolve problems by talking to people.
Yeah.
It's not really product. The only way to do it if you allow using other platforms.
Well, and of course, that means if you're going to run a marketplace within an org, then you're going to have redundancy, which all organizations are terrified of. That we're doing the same thing twice in two places.
That's the biggest terrible thing in an enterprise is to do the same thing twice. That allows. I mean, the entire evolution is based on redundancy of just like doing the same thing many times.
By definition, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, so I was just going to say, by definition, they can't be silos, because if it's going to be successful, you have to go out and talk to your customers. If you're talking to customers, it isn't a silo by definition.
So we're thinking of silos as being completely self-contained, where you communicate with work packages that get chucked over, as opposed to information flowing between groups of specialists. Oh, I think we've got a resolution on that one. We have consensus.
I was going to add, like, silos is, again, it's a mindset, right? It's not about, you know, one team doing everything start to end, but it's more of, you know, thinking about the other specialized role as you are working on your role. And so it's not about, you know, breaking like all of the silos and just one person doing everything, but it's that mindset. So I keep going back to, you know, the human component when you say silos.
Very cool. Carrie, how are we doing on the questions? I think we're ready for a new one.
Sorry, I lost my mouse there for a second. So Apoorva, we're like really on sync with these questions, because again, you lead me to my next question. Let's talk about the human side of SRE. How does this practice affect or improve the lives of our teams?
I mean, this is a topic that I care a lot about, so I'll jump in there.
Awesome.
And I think, one of the reasons that I originally got involved in the DevOps community is because the bad processes were creating a huge amount of pain for my teams. It wasn't just on the development side, where every single time you tried to get something into production, there was this enormous crunch and a load of bugs would be discovered at the last moment. But it was also the team who were in the operations side of things who were having to take these releases and support them in production with very, very little handover, actually very sort of
siloed.
Yeah, very siloed. And I was like, there must be a better way to do this. I was like, there must be a better way. And so that's how I originally got interested in this whole space, is because of the impact the bad practices were having on the humans in my team. And so I think there are enormous benefits to have from, being realistic about your expectations, setting a sustainable pace for the teams that you work with, setting them up for success, and trying to avoid big high risk releases, and releasing small changes, often reducing risk, reducing the stress associated with that as well. I think one of my favorite quotes, I sort of came into this today with a couple of my favorite quotes, but my favorite quote around this topic is, if we have to staff humans to do the work, then we're feeding the machines with blood, sweat and tears of human beings. And that is kind of my philosophy to how to get this right. If it can be done better by a computer in an automated way, then that is the implementation we should be going for. We should not be putting humans on that route.
So Hannah, one of my favorite authors, Charles Handy, he's old now, but he said something along the lines of, in the last century, we tried to get humans to work as machines. And now what we're doing is trying to get machines to work like humans.
Yeah.
Which is better than what we were doing in the last century. What does everybody else think about that? The people side and the human element of SRE?
So when we hire like product security engineers, we often look for, your comfort with code. And that's the same thing with SRE, right? When you're looking for SRE team members, one of the things that everybody looks at is also your code comfort level. And so now, especially where product security engineers and SRE have to interact with each other, they can actually speak a common language, which is, coming from their software developer language, their code comfort level. So collaboration is actually easier because everybody's talking the same language and everybody's on the same wavelength. So at least from a product security lens, it has become easier to collaborate with SRE.
Basically, we are a consulting company. Terna Solutions is a consulting company. And when I started doing consulting like 8-9 years ago, it was, I read some books about it, and they all say all the problems are human problems. None of it is technology. Now, doing it for 8 years, absolutely true. Every single technical problem can be traced to human behavior. It's beyond Conway's law, right? It's not just the architecture resembles organizational structure. It really is the humans, those who drive the technology, those who drive the processes and drive the interaction between them, their behavior, their actions every day. And to adapt new technology, to change the process, to do all of that, we need to change our way of doing things, right? And at the end, there's people who are good with people, they will produce really amazing software products.
I think one of the things that I've seen, and certainly working in pre-sales, it's sort of become more apparent, is that the personality traits that you see within sort of the development side of things are having to evolve. So typically developers were introverted. They're now having to become a little bit more extroverted. They now have to do stand-ups. They now have to talk in front of multiple people. They're not just left alone to actually sit and code and get an email that tells them the next thing they need to do. So I think on the sort of the human side of it, the culture side of it and the personality side of it, things have evolved massively in the last few years. And people are having to learn new interpersonal skills that they didn't necessarily have to have before. And it's a fascinating evolution, I think, from the workplace, for watching sort of what development teams used to be like 20 years ago to what they're like now.
And what do you say to
communicate?
And what do you say to people like me, Chris, who used to speak to my computer because I didn't want to speak to other people?
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm the same. Like I always say to people when I'm sort of trying to recruit, I'm looking for extroverted introverts because I need people who can get deep down and dirty in the tech, but actually can communicate and actually go out and talk to a customer and stand in front of a conference and do it. And it's actually really difficult to find people with this mix of skills, but it's the way that people are going to have to go. And seeing that sort of from the pre-sale side, it has to be, but I'm seeing that evolution as well in the development side. And like I say, when you go to a stand-up now, you can't be a mouse. You've got to shout up. If you've got a problem, that's the time that you have to bring it up. You have to do sort of retrospectives and all of this. The communication is there that just didn't used to have to be there.
And of course, how do we manage a range of people with different cognitive skills and preferences is, of course, an amazing question. Yeah. We don't have time for that one today because we're actually coming to the end. Neurodiversity, right? How do you deal with a neurodiverse group? Because meetings are exhausting for most people and doubly so for an introvert.
Yeah.
Okay, so wonderful. I'm going to ask people to give me a couple of parting words because we are finished for today. This was a very lively panel. I really enjoyed that. I like the fact that my partner, Pini, came in fancy dress and nobody else did. It's always the opposite. It's always the opposite. So this is brilliant. He's going to get a lot of shit up for this.
Already good thing, yes. Yeah.
So, Chris, any final words?
It comes back to what I said before. I think people just need to remain pragmatic about the way they do things. Don't over-engineer things. Keep communication lines open and get everyone involved as early as possible because it will save you headaches further down the line.
Hannah, any final thoughts?
I guess I would say to anyone who's really struggling to implement change, it does get easier. It has to be difficult to learn a new skill. You have to go through that learning process. So I think, perseverance is necessary if you're making transformational change in your organization and, celebrate those small wins as much as you can.
Apoorva, any final words?
I just wanted to say thank you for having me today. Because having, the SEC, representing the SEC portion here has been very exciting. So thank you. And the only thing is that, things keep changing. And all we can do is just, go on. Because I'm sure 10 years down the line, there's going to be something, entirely different. Maybe then it will be like silos are great because, maybe breaking the silos didn't work. So we never know. So we got to keep moving on. And if there's, change is good.
Pini, last words.
I mean, just to support everything that was said so far, but I think we are living in a world that is changing very fast, and the innovation and creativity are the main things today. And the operations side, the SRE side, perceived as something blocking change, and it shouldn't be. It's about supporting the change and doing it even faster.
Right, and on that note, our panel is over. So let me thank all of our wonderful panelists. Let me thank Carrie, who has been helping with the questions, but of course has been teaming up with me today on the DevSecOps channel. It's not a channel, it's a track. I am now finished for the day. So I have done my stint. Carrie is going to continue. She's going to be joined by Nathan Harvey, who's going to replace me. Let me just say one more time, thank you to all the sponsors, all the participants. We are this close to 4,000 subscribers for this conference. Tell your friends, bring them in if they're bored at work. Let them come in and see a couple of the talks later. Thank you again to everybody, and I am done. Goodbye.
Time for beer.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.